Good evening and welcome to the University of Toronto's webinar entitled Financial Literacy for Beginners. My name is Sarah Girgis and I'm a proud U of T alumna. I graduated with my undergraduate degree as an accounting specialist with a major in economics at U of T Mississauga. Following that, I completed my graduate diploma in professional accounting at the Rotman School of Management. I successfully wrote my chartered professional accountant's final exam in 2022 and now work as a senior accountant at KPMG and as an external auditor for some of Canada's largest mining companies. I'm also involved in KPMG's Women's Interchange Network, which encourages the retention and promotion of females in the workplace. I'm so pleased to welcome you to tonight's presentation, hosted by the Alumni Relations team at UTM and the Division of University Advancement. Alumni Relations is your lifelong resource to connect you to the U of T community of more than 660,000 alumni worldwide. We provide academic webinars highlighting our faculty and universities, many research initiatives, social events, as well as learning and development opportunities for alumni across all life stages. Although this event takes place online, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Today, we have many alumni and friends from all over the world watching this event, as well as from all across Canada and the United States. Welcome everyone attending around the world. Following the presentation, there will be a moderated question and answer period, and we encourage you to submit questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you are having technical difficulties, please use the chat button and one of our staff will be there to assist you through private message. And now I'm delighted to introduce our presenter. Please join me in welcoming proud UTM alumna and my sister, Sarah Girgis. Sarah is currently a senior strategy analyst with Canada Life. In her previous role, Sarah was a senior consultant in Deloitte's finance and performance consulting practice, specializing in finance transformation and performance management. Prior to that, she worked at KPMG in the risk advisory and external audit practices while obtaining her CPA designation. Sarah completed her Bachelor of Commerce degree at the University of Toronto Mississauga in 2019 and was awarded the honor of valedictorian at U of T Mississauga for her extracurricular and academic contributions to the University of Toronto community. Since graduating, Sarah has actively volunteered her time at U of T through various mentorship initiatives and is currently a board member of the U of T Mississauga Alumni Association. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening, Sarah. And without further ado, I'll let you get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's always shocking kind of to hear an introduction, but it is so kind to get it from your sister. So I'm just going to share my screen. I hope everyone can see it. And without further ado, good evening. My name is Sarah, as Miriam introduced, and I'm a chartered professional accountant. A little bit of a disclaimer before I get started that I am not a certified financial planner or financial advisor. So through the topics we cover tonight, I hope to give you an introduction to personal finance and enhance your existing knowledge to provide you with information that can help you make the best financial decisions for you, your family, and your circumstances. But this is not meant in any way to advise you or endorse any specific practice. Personal finance is just that, personal. I encourage you to connect the concepts we will discuss tonight to your own lives and reflect on what each topic means to you so that you might better be able to act on the information and make some positive changes into your life. So we're going to look at how to better manage this journey tonight. But first, I'm going to start with a couple of fun or not so fun facts. So did you know that Canadians had an average debt to income ratio of 170% for Statistics Canada? Your debt to income or DTI ratio is how much money you earn versus what you spend and owe. It's calculated by dividing your monthly debts by your gross monthly income. And generally, a DTI ratio of less than 35% is considered good. And so with that, we know that folks are really using debt to finance their spending well over the tune of 130% of where they should be. So paints a pretty startling picture to kick us off here tonight. Next, people are living beyond their means to finance their wants rather than their needs. And we're going to define these two topics a little bit more clearly later in the presentation. Lastly, we know that Canadians are not saving enough today. Almost 60% of those surveyed save less than 10% of their annual income. And in fact, individuals are saving less today than they did 2 years ago. And this is from a CPA Canada survey. Now, these three fun facts paint a pretty frightening economic picture of the average Canadian today. Interest rates have increased in the last year, which will stretch, if it hasn't already, the average Canadian's ability to make payments and the economy as a whole. The obvious solution is for Canadians to improve their rate of saving and decrease their debt. But obviously, this is easier said than done, and perhaps why you're here joining us today. And so we'll start by taking a little bit of a fitness poll, maybe indicating in the chat or using the poll that's just about to come up as to why you're maybe here tonight. Are you one, stressed and have no clue where to begin in managing your finances and you're a bit overwhelmed? Two, coping, managing things, maybe paycheck to paycheck or goal to goal, but you think there's room for improvement. Or three, you're pretty comfortable. You think you have a good grasp of your personal finance and you're just here to reinforce your learning or have some fun with us tonight, which is great. So I'll let those kind of responses come back in here while we move on to the next topic, which introduces us to, if I can get my screen working here, there you go, our relationship with money. So this typically begins at home and in your childhood. How your parents treated money and spoke about money, behaved around money can in turn affect how we interact with money today. So maybe you can personalize this a little bit with your own story. What were your parents' risk tolerances? Looking back to the way Miriam and I grew up, we definitely had one parent that was very conservative and risk averse, and the other was very much a risk-taking personality, very aggressive with their investments, and they were willing to, risk a little bit more for those higher returns. And so you can kind of do this analysis by thinking back. What kind of language did your parents or guardians use when discussing money? Awesome. Actually, the poll results are in, and I think most people or 60% of folks are coping, which sounds like people are doing a really great job, and some have some room for growth. So we'll get there, and we'll do the poll again at the end of the talk and see where things are if people have shifted since the beginning. But back to your relationship with money. So, what kind of language did your parents or guardians use when discussing money? Did you get an allowance growing up? Was this contingent on performing a certain task or completing something? Were they secretive about money? Did people hide things for some reason or another? Was money tight growing up? And did you know about it if it was? And what about your parental guardian roles? So, did one parent primarily were they the primary breadwinner? Who worked and who didn't, and perhaps why? So, taking this kind of inventory can help you get a sense of where you're coming from and helping you kind of navigate some of those challenges that you might have today with money. And that kind of draws us into our next topic, which is budgeting 101. And this is going to take a large portion of my talk here tonight because it's a really important topic. But we want to know our numbers like a CEO would. Imagine you're running your own little tiny business. You want to adopt a business-oriented mindset where you're taking inventory of your net monthly cash revenues. This is everything coming in, your fixed expenses, right? Things going out, but that you can factor with a high degree of certainty. These are things that don't change month to month. Your variable expenses, things that change, right? Outflows that change from month to month, depending on your level of spending, and your net profit. So taking everything coming in and subtracting everything going out. And we'll review this formula and a few others in a future slide. So don't worry about these formulas. But if you have debt, we also want to understand exactly what it is you owe and what the interest rates are on those dates so we can try to get a better sense of how to plan for repayment. So thinking about when you do this kind of self-reflection or when you put pen to paper and do these calculations, is your little business, are you turning a profit or are you running losses every month? What's your net worth and what's your cash flow? And so brings us kind of into our next slide where we're going to try to calculate using these formulas because it's really hard to plan ahead if you don't know where you're starting from. And so you want to calculate your net worth and your cash flow with a detailed budget. And I'll give you a couple suggestions on how to do that in some of the future slides. But your net worth should be positive and growing, ideally, with assets increasing and debt shrinking. Now, these are all terms and things that you might be hearing for the first time today. That's okay. Please kind of take inventory of any questions you might have. If I don't already answer it by the end of the talk, feel free to ask in the Q&A, and we'll hopefully be able to get to it. But The amount of money coming in every month is a finite amount, right? I think for most of us, that is the case in the reality, and therefore must be treated with care. Managing your money is all about making good choices. So, how much to save, spend, share with others, and invest. And that gets controlled in terms of what goes out, ideally by creating a budget for yourself. And doing these things can help provide a sense of control and hopefully some peace of mind so that once you know it's factored in, you can more comfortably and spend and enjoy, right? And so using this detailed budget is going to help balance your present and your future needs. But before we get into budgeting, I want to take a couple minutes because this is an introductory personal finance talk to understand your pay stub. So many of you will have graduated or soon be earning, hopefully your first incomes potentially. And so we're just going to walk through a sample pay stub that I pulled offline and marked it up so we can take a look at some of the key things um, and attributes of a pay stub to help you budget. Because you're actually going to use this pay stub to create your first budget if you haven't already done so. And I'll show you how to do that. But we're going to start with your gross earnings. So your gross income is what you've earned since the beginning of your fiscal or if your financial year, if we're looking at the year to date column, or the earnings in this period if you're looking at the column just to the left of that. It doesn't include any deductions and not even tax. Your real pay will unfortunately be less than this. Okay, so very rarely is your year to date gross income the same as your net pay because there are a bunch of deductions that we'll talk about coming off that line. Then we have, if you're a salaried worker or an hourly worker, you're going to have the hourly rate at which you're paid at. These can be multiple rates for different types of work if you perform different types of work for your employer. So, for instance, traveling, overtime. If you're in manufacturing, you might have different hourly rates depending on the task you're doing, for example. All things that you need to be aware of. If you're salaried, you're still going to see a rate number. It's just going to take your yearly salary divided by your standard hour work week for a 2-week period to calculate that rate. Next is everybody's favorite deductions, your income tax, EI, and CPP. These deductions are calculated based on your gross income and a progressive tax rate. The more money you make, the more you pay in taxes. And if you have two jobs or other income, don't be surprised if you have to pay additional tax at the end of the year. We're approaching that fun time of year, which is tax time. Us accountants love it as much as you do. And so this is the stuff that all gets factored into your tax forms that are provided by your employers so that your accountants can do this reconciliation at this time of year. Next is your EI contributions. Sorry, that disappeared on me there. Let's see if I can get it back. Here we go. Yes, no? Here we go. So EI contributions are made by yourselves and your employers. EI makes temporary payments if you become unemployed or you're unable to perform your duties due to an accident at work. So this is kind of a safety net. God forbid you're unemployed or have to be at home because of an accident. You apply to the government such that you receive a percentage of your pay that's held in this account for you in the case, God forbid, anything happens. And then your Canadian pension plan or Quebec pension plan, if you reside in Quebec, is a percentage of your gross income as well. As the name suggests, it's intended to provide pension income once you retire or if you become again disabled or perhaps survivor benefits. If anything happens to your spouse, you're able to receive that from them to support yourself, right? And lastly, some other deductions. So if your employer provides health benefits, its own pension plan, or deducts professional fees, these are going to be listed as other deductions as well, all coming off that gross income we talked at the beginning. And after everything gets kind of calculated down, you get your net pay, which is calculated, like I said, after subtracting all those deductions and taxes from your gross income. This is the amount that you'll see deposited into your bank account at the end of the 2-week period, let's say. And so we can't really begin to understand budgeting and investing without one of my favorite quotes by Albert Einstein, who says, compound interest is the greatest mathematical discovery of all time. It's the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pay it. So let's take an example, and I'll run through two examples. One with 100% compounding. Imagine I give you a penny and promise to double the amount every day for a month as follows. So day one, I'll give you a penny. Day two, you'll have two pennies. Day three, four, and so on. How much money do you think you would owe on day 31? And maybe you can type up some kind of math or your guesstimations in the chat here. But I think you'd be surprised to know that the answer is close to $11 million at day 31 because you have 100% compounding in this case. Now, that's quite rare. We don't see this in practice, in reality. Otherwise, we'd all be very wealthy. But the message here is that we want to use the power of compounding to make our savings grow. And let's kind of use a more realistic example. And some of you might know where I'm going with this. And know I don't want to guilt trip anyone. I love my little splurges as much as the next person, especially when that comes in the form of a hot tea on a very cold day. But this is the most common example that clearly illustrates many important and valuable behaviors, such as, right, unthinking and automatic spending can have a measurable impact over the long term. The power of compound interest is large, sorry. Frugal habits can make a difference. Investing your money for the long term can provide significant growth, and never think that your small actions won't make a difference to your wealth. So let's say you really enjoy your latte from insert your favorite coffee chain brand here on your way to work each morning. And it costs you $4 a day or $20 per working week. Not that much, right? Over a month, this coffee habit costs you $87. Over a year, over $1,000. And over 5 years, this adds up to $5,200. Now, what if instead of buying this coffee, you decided to put that $4 in a jar on your desk at work, and every Friday you invested that $20 you saved? Assuming an 8% return annually, your savings have grown to over 300,000 at the end of 40 years. Now, please don't come after me after this talk. I am not telling you that you can't have your coffee in the morning. Please continue to enjoy the small things if you've accounted for its cost and the foregone potential of this expense, which is a great segue into our budgeting conversation. So let's do it. So this is a pretty basic budget here. It's the 50-30-20 budget rule, which says or recommends that 50% of your money goes towards your needs, 30% towards your wants, and 20% towards your savings. And this is the time where I define your needs and wants in a minute. But the savings category also includes money you'll need to realize your future goals. We want to notice a couple things about this little pie here. We want to live within our means. So you'll notice that all the numbers add up to 100, not 170 as the stat mentioned earlier. We can't spend more than we earn. And I say that with regards to your regular consumer spending. Purchases that require financing, like your mortgages or car ownership, is going to be discussed later when we talk about debt. And understanding that your basic needs are few. You need shelter, food, and transportation, but your wants are endless. You want a flat screen TV, the new iPhone, your newer car, bigger house, vacations, whatever. Figure out what you truly need, minimize your wants, and therefore minimize your spending. So let's take a look and see what kind of goes into these various categories. Um, and so you'll notice that your needs are listed there. Your wants include subscriptions, supplies for hobbies, restaurant meals, vacations, like I said before. I've included charitable giving as both a need and a want. Depending on how you view this type of spending, you'll kind of need to incorporate it either here or there, depending on how you see fit. And your savings, which I call the fund of the future. That includes your emergency fund, which should constitute about 3 to 6 months of your living expenses, paying your debt beyond the minimum amounts, your retirement accounts, etc. And we want to start by taking a look at that paycheck based on the exercise we did earlier. If your taxes are withheld, just like we saw in the earlier example, we want to subtract that amount from your total earnings, and do not subtract other amounts that might be withheld or automatically deducted, like your health insurance or your retirement contributions. You're going to allocate those to their respective categories based on your budget. And so, like I said, your needs are about half of your budget. These are expenses that need to be met no matter what. And if you can honestly say, I can't live without it, you've identified it as a need. Your wants, like I said, about 30% is your subscription to the streaming service that has you has your favorite TV show, not because you need that subscription to live, but because these are things you enjoy and that you spend money on these items by choice. The remaining 20% of your budget should go towards the future. Like I said, your emergency fund is protection in the case that, you have an accident or God forbid get laid off, ideally in a high interest savings account or a 30 or 90-day GIC. So being kept fairly liquid or easily convertible into cash. Um, and not spending. So this is a great kind of segue into a key kind of accounting topic or concept of the fact that you're choosing to not spend $1 is the equivalent of earning $2. And I'll prove it for you. So $2 of earnings taxed at 50% leave you an after-tax amount of $1. So this is one of those areas where the math is not mathing unless you're saving. And there are lots of great tools online to help you with this, and you can customize templates online to fit your needs. I have a lot of recommendations at the end of the presentation where I have a resource slide, so just hang on for that. And a little bit of a pro tip for you is please try to automate your budget as much as you can by pre-scheduling transfers of your funds into certain allocations at your bank account or elsewhere so that you make this a habit, not because you're actively thinking about it, but because you've already set it up to do the hard work, right? Okay, so it brings us to our SMART goals slide where we want to take a look at some of our bigger savings goals and how do we effectively break these down so that they're, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time frame. So let's take an example. And again, when you're setting a goal, the more detail you have, the better you can plan for it, and the more likely that goal becomes a reality. So I want to take a few minutes to look through this example here with you guys. So let's say my friends and I'd like to go on a 2-week trip to Australia. That's very specific. I'm going to need to measure that in terms of how much I need for my flight, say $3,000, and my share of the accommodation and meals. Next, we want to make it attainable. So maybe we want to travel off peak season and stay in a reasonably priced hotel so that things and costs are kept to a manageable level. Next, we need to make it realistic. So $3,000, I have a year to save for it. That means I'm putting away around 250 bucks a month for the next year. And knowing your limits and financial capabilities with reference to your budget will determine whether your goal is realistic. Let's say you crunch the numbers and we got the $250 value, and you're looking at your budget and you have no idea how you're going to make that work with your current level of expenses and the way and the level of your income. Well, maybe we need to reconsider if this is an appropriate timeline to save for the trip or if you're able to go. And lastly, we want it to be time frame. So like I said, we're going to travel off peak season, stay in a reasonably priced hotel so that we can travel by the end of the year. That's our goal. And so it brings us to some of the most exciting content that I have here for us, and some that I think, and one that easily kind of confuses folks, but I'll be covering our Canadian financial planning vehicle content. And this is where I think some of the questions, when I was reviewing before the talk are going to stem from and come from, and that's understandable. One of these vehicles is new, the other two are tried and true, but different purposes. And so I'm happy if I, again, don't answer your question on this slide here, to circle back with you at the end of the conversation and we can fine tune this piece. But our first home savings account, let's start there. So this is a new vehicle introduced in April of last year where you can open this account and make tax deductible contributions of $8,000 annually to a lifetime maximum of $40,000 over 5 years. And your withdrawals are not taxable, meaning you don't have to pay any income tax, any interest, dividends, or capital gains tax held on the investments inside this account. And it's meant to help qualifying Canadian residents over 18 years save and pay for their first Canadian qualifying home. Next, you have your TFSA or your tax-free savings account. So contributions in this account, unlike the first home savings account, are not tax deductible. So you don't get to save on your tax bill like you would in the first vehicle. But similarly, any interest, dividends, or capital gains are not subject to income tax that are within this account or withdrawn. So the TFSA can be used to save for retirement, purchase a home, finance any post-secondary education or simply to save for a rainy day, this is by far the most flexible of the vehicles, in my opinion, for the reason that you can use them for any purpose. You just kind of have to be mindful of your limits so that you don't over-contribute, withdraw, and then try to recontribute. There are going to be penalties, as there are for over-contribution into any of these vehicles. But lastly, we have your registered retirement savings plans, or RRSPs. It's a savings plan registered with the Canadian federal government that you can contribute to for retirement purposes. So when you contribute money to an RRSP, your funds are tax advantaged, meaning that you're exempt from being taxed in the year you made the contribution. Um, and there are a little bit more kind of involved rules when uh, turn of a retirement age. You'll be able to withdraw your funds, and ideally have it withdrawn at a taxable rate, but much lower than you would currently have as a working professional. So it's tax advantaged, but your withdrawals are taxable. Um, when you are retired, a lot uh, more beneficially than you were currently. And there's an asterisk with this one because you are able to withdraw to also purchase a home. That's called the home buyer's plan, or to pursue further education. That's the lifelong learning plan, but with the caveat that these amounts withdrawn from your RSP need to be replaced, meaning you are going to set up a payment plan with the government, so to speak, so that you're recontributing the amounts withdrawn back into the vehicle. And so, a bit of a pro tip, tomorrow is actually the deadline for contributing to your RSP for the 2023 tax year. So, if you are able to make a contribution, being cognizant again of your limits, please do so because you will get that tax benefit in the 2023 tax year. The last thing I'll say about your RSP is you want to maximize any free money or free lunch opportunities, we call them, with employer matched retirement options. Just be aware of the fine print. So some company RRSPs outline investment options, and if you don't have a company plan but are looking to invest, it's worth consulting with an investment advisor or your company HR department for more information. But next, we'll discuss what kind of investments you can hold in these various accounts. And as you can kind of see on these slides here, these options increase in risk as we read down the slide, but any of these ultimately can be placed into the aforementioned financial planning vehicles we've just spoken about. As a risk-averse individual, I think the number one priority is to preserve capital, which is in line with someone like myself who, again, doesn't want to put money into an investment that ultimately goes to zero. I think that pretty much makes sense. But when people are younger, you can afford to take more risk, and uh, you can take more risk on through riskier investments such as mutual funds, ETFs, and individual securities. And as you get closer to retirement, you become more risk adverse, in the sense that if we as a young investor loses money today, we have time to recover these losses through several years of income generation, i.e., we kind of have a longer timeline, which we can recover losses, leaving us a greater time horizon to make up for anything going wrong, rather than someone that's a couple years from retirement that's really going to be depending on these funds and soon. So the key here is to save the money in your investment account and let it grow. Try not to withdraw and spend it. One popular method for equity investments, such as stocks that issue a dividend, is a dividend reinvestment plan, or DRIP, where any dividends are automatically reinvested in the shares, thus removing kind of any temptation to spend the cash. Similar reinvestment methods could be applied to interest received on debt investments, such as your bonds or your certificates. And the last thing I'll say is, ideally, you want to designate beneficiaries where possible in these relevant accounts. God forbid, again, anything happening, your beneficiaries can receive the benefits of you putting this money away. So lots of content on this slide. I want to take a minute and a pause to say that varying degrees of risk, like I said, varying characteristics in each of these investment options, each with their own advantages and disadvantages. And I have a great slide actually in my appendix if folks want to go into these in a little bit more detail at the end of the presentation. Happy to do so, and we can take a look at those at the end. But it brings me to an illustrative example of not putting all your eggs in one basket, which in finance we call diversification. And it plays a role in counterbalancing any negative performance of some of your investment by averaging those with some positive performance in others. And the graph I kind of have to the right-hand side is an illustrative example of this. If you already have different types of investments, maybe consider this as an exercise to do a quick calculation and see how many of each type of holding you have and continue to rebalance this as time and life goes by and your priorities change. So let's take a look at an example. Say you only invested in airline stock. During the pandemic, airline stock underperformed following a major lockdown across the globe, causing you to take a massive loss because, let's be honest, nobody was traveling very much during the pandemic. But had you diversified your fund into other stocks such as commerce, only part of your portfolio would be affected. In fact, it might have actually yielded better returns as e-commerce was booming during the pandemic and everybody was on Amazon getting delivery, right? And this kind of brings me to one of our favorite topics, which is debt. And I know something that weighs on a lot of people's minds. Um, I have a pretty nice summary here, ones that you'll have heard about before. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide. But the one thing I will spend some time is you'll see an APR note under the auto loan section, and that's an acronym that stands for annual percentage rate. APR is an interest rate plus any additional fees charged by the lender without accounting for the compounding of interest. So the APR gives you that consistent basis for presenting annual interest rate information to protect consumers from misleading advertising, but might not reflect actual cost of borrowing because lenders can put different costs, calculating this rate a little bit differently. Okay. And some of these presented on the slides, I will say, are self-limiting debt, meaning they're the good debts to kind of have and use rather than others. And we can get into that if there's a little bit more time at the end. But like I said, using some types of credit can be more expensive than using others. And so there are different examples here. I set up this illustrative table again to take a look at, say you purchase something for $1,000. That total final cost for borrowing money will look very differently than if you had paid for that purchase with cash. And again, will look very differently than if you just made minimum payments rather than, paying a little bit more than that and getting yourself out of debt sooner. And the reason being is the way that the interest is calculated. So interest being calculated adds to the cost of this purchase. Again, the power compounding again, but just not working out in your benefit, unfortunately, in the case of using debt to purchase, right? And kind of being wary about that interest rate and how it's calculated, or that APR, reading the fine print before you make a purchase, just to really understand the total cost of an item before you make that decision to purchase, right? Okay, so in terms of credit tracking, when you get a credit card or buy on credit for the first time, you enter the fun world of credit tracking. By signing on for a credit card, you authorize two companies in Canada to now track your credit history and credit payments. These two companies, in turn, provide credit reports in the form of reports, ratings, and scores to any person you want to borrow from, or um, so any money or to any persons you want to borrow from. And so these two bureaus in Canada are TransUnion and Equifax. They provide a profile on customers based on their repayment record, and they need your permission to gather and share your private information. This isn't something that is public knowledge, or they have a right to disclose without your consent. Your credit reports include information like personal identification, any hard hits, which include those where you have applied for credit, or soft hits, your own credit checks, creditors pulling information about their products, those which you hold. Those are only shown to you. Your credit history details of your credit accounts and transactions, payments made or not made on time, banking information, consumer statement, and the list goes on. If you're curious, please do the exercise of going onto TransUnion or Equifax's website and applying to take a look at your own credit report and score, and do that kind of self discovery to see what it says about you. But I do want to quickly discuss the difference of the score versus the rating. So your score estimates your credit worthiness, whether you're a good borrower with one numerical value, and you can see that scale there, where a poor credit score is considered something less than 600, and excellent over 750. And your credit rating is a rating of 1 to 9, where 1 is all that your payments are being made on time, or that with 9, excuse me, 1 being the best, all your payments are made on time, 9 being the worst, meaning your bills are never paid or a consumer proposal has been submitted to your lender, as well as how well you repay each of your debt obligations. So this is listed out. Your credit score indicates how financially responsible you are, and it's a reference point lenders use to determine how risky of a borrower you might be. This ties into the cost of debt because the riskier you might be, the higher your rate goes up for making certain types of purchases. And your credit score is determined based on the following. There's a little bit of a breakdown at the bottom of the slide here. You want to work on each of these 5 items to increase your credit score. Okay, let's go through another formula. Another fun little formula that I like to use before making a big purchase is the cost per use, which is it's very easy taking the cost of an item and dividing it by the number of times you anticipate using it. I decided to throw together a fun little example before we take a look at our resources and conclude for the evening, which is purchasing the brand new iPhone 15 Plus. Let's say it retails for $1,700, but you plan to use it for 2 years, 10 times a day on average. Fun fact, you're probably using your phone a lot more than that. It's actually closer to 100 times if studies are to be believed. And so that gives you a cost per use of about 23 cents every time you pick up your phone for the next 2 years. So if you think that's worth it, hopefully I didn't just sucker some of you into buying the new iPhone. It just gives you a bit of a reference point that you can use when you're making any purchases moving forward. Okay, so before we close and do another little pulse check to see how we're feeling at the end of this talk, I do want to point you to a few resources, and I'm happy to share these slides with our event organizers if there's a request. To click on some of these links or look at some of these resources offline, I'm happy to do so. But I just want to preface the Q&A with the fact that likely your question has been asked before, 99% of the time at least, and that 1% is likely because it's a very personal situation to you, and without knowing your full life story, I wouldn't want to advise you. So please seek other resources if your question can't be answered very generally online. You do have online templates, excuse me, at your disposal. And I've linked a couple of the ones that I really enjoy and that have been brought to my attention when I, was telling others that I was making this talk, those that can vouch for some of these resources, as well as the CRA website and your CPA website, all credible, so that you're receiving the most kind of financially up to date topics and content that you can have. Next is media and print. So I'm sure all of us are on social media. Train your algorithms to enjoy personal finance by yourself engaging in the content. You'll see this stuff come up if you're clicking on it and interacting with it. And so you can, take kind of moments to do that for yourself so that you're looking at the content and engaging with it and hopefully learning something from it. There are great podcasts, newsletters, books I've listed there. There's also a cash flow game that you can enjoy with friends or family looking to learn about finance or enhance your learning. There's also great TV shows. So, How to Get Rich is on Netflix. Just a disclaimer, it's not a fast track to getting rich. Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet, but Ramit is a great kind of personality that teaches others about finance. And so I really enjoyed watching the show. Just be conscious of the content you're consuming. There's a lot of US content out there. So, not that a lot of things aren't transferable between borders, but just being aware that their investment vehicles, for example, are a little different than ours. and so on. And lastly, your advisor. So, and perhaps we can take this into another talk, but there are different advisors, like your brokerage accounts versus your robo advisors and your traditional advisor. But please do your due diligence, shop around and inquire about their compensation structure and how their fees are working, because some do receive commission based on sales, and therefore they're biased to kind of having you purchase or make certain investments. Just being aware of that is really important. But in the interest of time, we do want to conclude to get to Q&A, and I just want to do the poll one last time. We're almost at the top of the hour, and I hope we had a little bit of movement, at least from stress to coping, hopefully. But if you are still stressed, that's okay. Perhaps we'll do a follow-up session. I'd be happy to come back and do a little bit more. And if you're coping, or perhaps you've moved into comfortable, I'm seeing the poll results coming back up. There's some slight movement, definitely better than earlier, so I'm glad we made progress in less than an hour. I think that's a win in my books. And so I hope you all really enjoyed it. With that, thank you so much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Okay, on behalf of the University of Toronto Mississauga and the Division of the University Advancement, I'd like to thank Sarah for her presentation and responses to the questions. So we're just going to dive right into a few of them now. And let's just see here. First one, as someone who has just started working and has no RRSP contribution room yet, is there anything I should be doing before tomorrow's deadline, or will I have to wait until next year?
Okay, well, you may have built a little bit of a deadline, or excuse me, a contribution room just based on any previous work you may have done. So what I would do is log into the CRA website. You can do so using a sign-in partner if you don't already have a CRA account, which just means you're using your bank login information to get online. And your CRA website will have your contribution limits for both your RSP and TFSA, just being conscious that it won't have 2023 necessarily updated. So if you've made any contributions or withdrawals in the last year, that will likely not be updated and something you just have to track manually. Hope that
Okay,
answers your question.
sounds good. How is the line of credit different from a credit card?
Yeah, great question. It is different. So likely, and the most common difference you'll see is that the rate is very different. The terms will likely be different as well, depending on your lender. Your rate on a credit card will generally be a lot higher than your personal line of credit, but ultimately that depends again on your lender. Um, just very generally, that would be the answer there.
And it all affects our credit score the same, right?
It depends on how you use it, right? So, yes, typically, I'm actually going to pull up my slides and see if I can quickly either reshare or, yes, I have that slide. So why don't I reshare it? Perhaps you missed it off the slide. But like I said, we will circulate the slides afterwards if you'd like. But here we go. There's the little summary that I was looking for. Hopefully that's helpful to you. So the credit card and the line of credit, they're a little bit different. Both have limits. The credit card is revolving. You don't have to pay off the entire balance at the end of the month and generally unsecured. So it's not tied to a physical asset where generally your line of credit is. Repayment terms differ. Again, your line of credit might differ in that it might also be revolving if your lender so allows. And the rate varies depending on certain things, right? Okay, next question.
Okay, next question. I heard each time you check Equifax, it affects your credit score. Is that true?
If you're doing your own check on your own kind of financial status, that is considered a soft hit and shouldn't truly affect your credit. Things like those hard hits that I talked about, where your lenders are trying to check, or if you've had any defaults or payment issues in the past, those are things that are more likely to more heavily affect your credit. but I wouldn't worry so much about you doing your own personal check online and just keep it infrequent. Things don't change very much, very often. So it doesn't need to
Okay.
happen all the time.
So, as your sister, I can't always go easy on you, so I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate and ask
Yeah,
one of my
ask me
own
the fun ones.
questions.
Yeah.
So how would you respond to the saying of you can only make money if you spend it?
Oh, that's great. Because Miriam and I have very different opinions on that question. No, like I get it. I think, certain things require a level of investment. Just make sure it's proportional to what you're willing to put in, if that makes sense, right? Like I think present day as someone starting out, maybe ease yourself into this world of investing. Only be prepared to contribute what you are ultimately willing to part ways with, because and especially as things get more risky, they're less guaranteed. So that would be my advice. Maybe Miriam, you can disagree with me.
No, I do agree with you. It took me a while to get
Okay,
there.
good.
It took me a few years, but the lessons were learned. And maybe
Yeah.
this feeds into a bit of my next question, but how do you hold yourself back from the new finance trends that come out and kind of sweep the world? I know I
Okay.
fell victim to some with cryptocurrencies, and we know that NFTs were the craze in 2021. And I think
Right.
Forbes recently announced that 95% of them are now worthless. So, how do you balance that risk with trends?
Great question. My advice would be please don't invest into anything you don't understand yourself. Um, I can neither advocate for or against certain investments. You kind of saw my slide there that captured all the common investing options. But I would neither advocate or dissuade someone from purchasing something they strongly believed in for whatever reason. I would just advise you to do your own research and again, only invest what you're comfortable parting ways with. Otherwise, keep yourself, in that top half of the table that I showed previously with some of the less risky investment options. As you move down that table, things are a lot more variable, right? Less guaranteed. And you've heard the saying like high risk, high reward, sure, but the opposite is also true, where that reward can go to zero very, very quickly. So just be careful.
Good. Okay. Another question here. How do we choose between TFSA and RRSP?
Great question. It does, and I'm seeing the questions here revolving, around my comments on deductibility versus taxability. Those are things that, um, are a little bit more financially involved. But basically, all that is to say is, your TFSA offers you a lot more flexibility in that you can withdraw it for any purpose that you so choose. Your RSP is confined to being used for retirement purchases, but for those two special circumstances that I spoke about, your home buyer and your lifelong learning plan. Ultimately, if you were to withdraw from your RRSP for those two reasons, it does need to be repaid at a certain timeline. Because again, the government is not allowing you to withdraw your RSP until you are retired. Um, your TFSA, like I said, is not taxed. Your RSP is. The whole concept of your RSP is such that you're reducing your tax bill currently when you're likely making more money as a younger individual. When you're older, making no money as a retiree, theoretically, you're paying much less tax when you make those withdrawals. That's the name of the game there. Save you a little bit of a tax bill presently. Um, and further, like I think it depends, right, on what you're using it for. I think your TFSA obviously doesn't have those same characteristics, but it offers you a lot more flexibility. I hope that's
Okay,
helpful.
this is a bit overarching question here. There are a lot of different titles for finance professionals. Which financial professional titles are accredited and which ones can be used by anyone? i.e., who are some good people to trust with our money management?
That's a great question. I think ultimately you are going to have to shop around and take a look at people's kind of designations and their areas of specialization. So I'll give you an example. I'm a CPA or a certified, or excuse me, a chartered professional accountant. our bread and butter is your audit work, tax work, and some of us are in consulting like I am now. Likely, we're not your financial advisors working out of a branch or at a wealth management company. We could be. It's just not likely the designations that we're to hold, right? My advice would be do your research, talk to a lot of people. Most advisors are willing to have a free consult with you to get an understanding of your finance challenges, your goals, do a little bit of a sit down with you and lay out your finances to get a sense of what you need and want. But my advice is to perhaps if someone's starting out is, maybe visit somebody at the branch. A personal advisor is more than likely to meet your needs as someone in this stage of life that doesn't necessarily have a lot of business holdings or assets, right? Or obligations, right? So I think this stage of life, that's how I personally got started, is with a close personal contact of mine at the branch who is able to navigate me into, an honest direction. And like I said, just be mindful of their compensation, their background. Do your research before entering a conversation with somebody, but most are willing to sit down for a free 30 minutes just to get a sense of what you're looking for. And you can feel someone out. You can tell when someone's being genuine and honest. And over time, those relationships with my financial advisors turned into close friendships. I trusted these individuals to advise me honestly, even if it meant they weren't making a commission on the sale. Right. So that's something that you can kind of gauge for yourself over time.
Yeah, and it takes time to build those relationships and really feel trust because at the end of the day, it is our life savings that we're putting in someone's hand and relying them to manage for us. But I also think it's really important to kind of take a step back and ask yourself, what are your goals? What are you trying to get out of it? And then going to meet and shop around and see who's able to
Yeah.
align your goals with respective options. So
Yeah, and take different pieces of advice. You don't need to sit down with the first person you meet and kind of give them your life savings, like Mariam mentioned. I think it's a little extreme, but um, I think definitely just shop around, try a few different banks, a few different wealth advisors, folks at maybe an insurance, right? Like different wealth products. So doing your research, seeing what you might need, so you're entering into those conversations knowledgeable as well, will go a long way for you.
yeah,
I hope that answers your question.
especially when there's so many options out there, it's like someone can only know so much. If you go to one branch, one person, it's good to shop around just to get an idea for what else is out there.
Yeah, and I think there's a question here. I think Alexander's asking, should you ask Bontley if they get commission? Um, I mean, you could. I mean, it depends how direct you want to be. I think I would more so just ask in the sense of like, is there anything I should know in terms of how your compensation works, or are there any fees associated with your service? Like, what do those look like? And I think most people will be honest enough to give you an understanding of how they are compensated if there are any issues or conflicts there.
Okay. I have another question here. I went through this very recently, so I like this question. For someone who's not too used to making and saving large amounts of money, if I want to rapidly shift to start saving as much as possible, what is a good way to start that progress ASAP?
Create a budget. So I'm a firm believer in that your level of income will not solely just dictate how financially successful you'll be. You probably heard the saying like as your income wealth increases, so does your lifestyle and your spending. Therefore, kind of making it harder for someone that actually makes very good money to stay in debt and just not be as financially kind of well off as someone who might not be making as much, right? The concept isn't how much you make, but how much you save. So I really appreciate that you're cognizant and aware of that. I would say make your budget. Take a look at those line items, right? When you put pen to paper of things you can, sacrifice or forego for some of these goals that you have to reach. But all work and no play is also no fun. So don't forget to, treat yourself and bake in those opportunities for a reward, when you meet certain goals and meet certain milestones, because life's meant to be enjoyed as well. And I'm a huge advocate for balance. Um, like I said, that budget, right? Your savings are your fund of the future, but your present value of that enjoyment of that dollar can also mean a lot to somebody. So just try to take both into consideration. But appreciate your interest in building some wealth for yourself. So commend you for that.
Okay. So last question for the night. Can you please speak briefly to buying stocks and how, if at all, we should look into trading?
Yeah, absolutely. So trading, not for me to answer because I'm a more of a buy and hold kind of girl. So not sure you're gonna get the best advice out of me on that topic. I also think that's the way to long-term wealth, like I said, is buy and hold. But if you are interested in trading, your banks have trading accounts available. There are brokerages that I had referred to earlier on the slide, such as Wealthsimple or Questrade. There are many others that you can look into opening a free account with. But again, just do your research. Please don't just open one of these accounts at my advice. Do your research before you purchase anything, and be mindful of what your strategy is. Trading is very different and looks very differently than my strategy, which is buy and hold for the long term, right? So just be mindful of what you're getting yourself into and the risks that that entails. So yes, I think we're at time, right? Miriam, you have some closing remarks.
So on behalf of the University of Toronto Mississauga and the Division of the University Advancement, I'd like to once again thank Sarah for her presentation and responses to the questions from our alumni audience.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. I hope you guys had as much fun as I did.
Thanks, Sarah. To our audience, we received a lot of questions today, and we apologize if we did not get to yours. Everyone who registered for today's event will also receive a link to the recording in their inboxes in the coming days. Along with the recording, you'll have the option to take an online post-event survey, which will arrive to your email inbox sometime next week, and we do hope that you take a couple minutes to complete it, as your feedback is helpful for planning future events. And if you enjoyed today's webinar, be sure to check out the upcoming events listing and more on the UTM alumni webpage and the UFT upcoming events hub. If you'd like to learn more about managing your personal finances and supplement your learning from today's session, the Alumni Relations team at the UTSC will be hosting an exciting webinar next week. You'll see a link for more information pop up in the chat box now, and it'll also be included in the post-event survey details. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to hosting you again at another UFT UTM alumni event. Thank you.